Welcome to Passions Illustrated. Before starting the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The wedding invitation rested on Lauren Matthews' desk like a silent accusation. The pearly paper with its elegant gold lettering announced the marriage of Christopher Bennett and Megan Reynolds. Lauren ran her fingers over the embossed letters, feeling each curve like a little stab in her heart. Sitting in her office at Martinez and Associates, one of Boston's largest law firms, she couldn't concentrate on the file she was supposed to be reviewing. "You still haven't responded to the invitation." The voice of Ashley Martinez, her best friend and partner at the firm, brought her back to reality. Lauren looked up, meeting her friend's worried gaze. "I don't know if I should go," Lauren replied, pushing the invitation away. "Chris and I, it's complicated." Ashley leaned on the mahogany table, crossing her arms. "You've been best friends for years. He deserves your support right now." Lauren let out a heavy sigh. Memories of the last 5 years flooded her mind. The late nights studying at law school, the endless conversations about her dreams and fears, the way Chris had always been there for her, even when she was lost in her toxic relationship with Ryan, the ex-boyfriend who had taken up 3 years of her life and left scars that still hadn't completely healed. The same Ryan who had been the reason Chris had never declared himself, always respecting the space Lauren needed to recover. "I remember the day he met Megan," Lauren commented, twirling her pen between her fingers. "It was at that conference in Chicago 2 years ago. He came back different, and you realized too late that your feelings for him went beyond friendship." Ashley added, her voice soft but firm. The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Lauren answered it mechanically, but her thoughts wandered to that particular night 6 months ago when Chris had announced his engagement during a dinner with friends at Le Petit Bistro, his favorite restaurant on Beacon Hill. Lauren had smiled and toasted like everyone else, but something inside her broke at that moment. It was as if a veil had been removed from her eyes, revealing feelings that had been dormant for so long. After ending the call, Lauren stood up and walked over to the 20th floor window. Boston stretched out before her, the Charles River winding through the city like a silver ribbon. "Sometimes I wonder if I blew my chance," she confessed. "Chris has waited for you for a long time, Lauren," Ashley replied, moving closer. "After Ryan, you built up so many walls that no one could really get close." The afternoon sun painted the sky orange, reflecting off the windows of the surrounding buildings. Lauren thought about how Chris always said that this was the best time of day, when the city seemed to be shrouded in liquid gold. "I got a message from him earlier today," Lauren revealed, turning to Ashley. "He wants to meet me for coffee. He said we needed to talk before the wedding." Ashley arched an eyebrow. "And you're going?" "I've arranged to meet him tomorrow at the Thinking Cup," Lauren replied, feeling her heart race at the thought of meeting him. "He's always loved the coffee there." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and legal documents, but Lauren's mind kept going back to Chris. She remembered perfectly the day he comforted her after a breakup with Ryan, how his big, gentle hands held hers as she cried, how he promised that everything would be okay. At the end of the day, Lauren gathered her things and walked to the underground parking lot inside her Audi. She allowed the tears to finally fall. The wedding invitation was still in her bag, reminding her of all the missed chances, all the unspoken words. Driving through the familiar streets of Boston, Lauren thought about how her life had come to this. Chris had been her safe haven for so long that she had never considered that she might lose him now. As she stopped at a red light on Commonwealth Avenue, she wondered if she would have the courage to tell him the truth. In her Back Bay apartment, Lauren took off her heels and poured herself a glass of red wine. The city lights shone through the windows of her 12th floor apartment, creating a scene that would normally calm her down. But that night, every light seemed to mock her, reminding her of the moments when she could have told Chris how she felt. Her phone vibrated with a message. "See you tomorrow, Chris." Lauren stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Yes, at 10 a.m. Putting the phone away, she walked over to her bookshelf and picked up a photo album. The pictures told the story of her friendship with Chris: graduations, parties, impromptu weekend trips. In each photo, there was something she had never noticed before: the way he looked at her, how close he always was, protective. "How could I have been so blind?" she muttered to herself, carefully closing the album. That night, Lauren could barely sleep. Her thoughts oscillated between memories of the past and anxiety about the next day's meeting. She knew she had to make a decision: remain silent and watch the man she loved marry someone else, or risk everything and finally reveal her feelings. What she didn't know was that her decision would change not only her life, but also Chris and Megan's, triggering a series of events that neither of them could have predicted. The Thinking Cup was particularly busy that fall morning. Lauren arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled time, choosing a table near the window overlooking Tremont Street. Her fingers drummed nervously on the wooden surface as she watched the golden leaves dancing on the sidewalk. "Do you still prefer your coffee with almond milk and a touch of vanilla?" Chris's familiar voice startled her. He was standing next to her holding 2 steaming cups with that smile that always made her heart skip a beat. "You remember?" Lauren replied, accepting the drink with a shy smile. Chris sat down opposite her, his blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her look away. He was wearing a navy blue blazer over a white shirt, probably on his way to the architecture firm where he was a partner. "How could I forget? It's been years of you asking for the same thing," he said, taking a sip of his black coffee. "Lauren, why did you want to see me?" she interrupted him, plucking up the courage to face him. Chris placed his cup on the table, his fingers playing with a napkin. "You didn't reply to the wedding invitation, and for the last few weeks, I've felt that you've been avoiding me." Lauren felt her heart racing. The words she had been rehearsing all evening seemed to have evaporated from her mind. "I'm not avoiding you," she lied, knowing that he would notice. "We've known each other too long to lie to each other," Chris said softly. "Something has changed between us since I announced the engagement. I want to understand what happened to my best friend." The noise of the kettle and the surrounding conversations seemed distant as Lauren struggled with her emotions. A stubborn tear ran down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "Sometimes," she began, her voice almost a whisper, "we realized things too late." Chris leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "What are you talking about? After Ryan, you were there. You've always been there." Lauren continued, the words flowing like a dam finally breaking. "You helped me rebuild my life piece by piece, and I was so focused on protecting myself, on not getting hurt again, that I didn't realize." Lauren. Chris interrupted her, his voice tense. "Please don't go on," but she couldn't stop now. "I didn't realize I was falling in love with my best friend, and when I finally did, you were already with Megan." The silence that followed was deafening. Chris leaned back in his chair, wiping his hands across his face in frustration. "Why now?" he finally asked. "Why after all this time?" "Because I can't watch you get married without you knowing the truth," Lauren replied, feeling as if each word tore a piece out of her heart. "I've waited for you," Chris said, his voice heavy with emotion. "For years I waited for you to be ready, but you always kept your distance, always had an excuse not to get too close." Lauren felt the weight of her past choices. "I know, and I regret it every day." "Megan makes me happy," Chris declared, although his voice trembled slightly. "She's not afraid to give herself to me to build something real with me." "I understand," Lauren replied, fighting back tears, "and that's why I didn't respond to the invitation. I can't pretend to be happy watching you marry someone else." Chris reached across the table, lightly touching her fingers. "What do you want me to do?" "Lauren, the wedding is in 3 weeks. I'm not asking you to do anything," she replied, withdrawing her hand. "I just needed you to know." Chris's cell phone vibrated. A message from Megan. Lauren saw her name on the screen and felt her stomach flip. "You need to go," she said, getting up. "Lauren, wait," Chris called, also getting up. "We can't leave things like this. We've already let things go too far," she replied, picking up her bag. "I'm sorry about everything, Chris. I hope you'll be very happy." Before he could reply, Lauren quickly left the cafe, plunging into the cold Boston air. The tears she had been holding back finally flowed freely down her face as she hurried down Tremont Street. Her phone rang several times. They were messages from Chris, but she couldn't read them. Instead, she called. "Ashley, I've done something terrible," she said as soon as her friend picked up. "Where are you?" Ashley asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm going to the office. I need to bury myself in work and forget this morning ever happened. I'll ask them to cancel your meetings. I'm picking you up," Ashley declared. "You shouldn't be alone right now." Lauren continued walking, passing Boston Common, without really seeing the beauty of the park. That fall morning, her mind replayed every moment of her conversation with Chris, every expression on his face, every unspoken word. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, Chris was sitting in the coffee shop, staring at Lauren's untouched cup of coffee, his own world silently crumbling as memories of years of friendship and unrequited love flashed through his mind like a slow-motion movie. The news spread through the Martinez and Associates office like fire through dry straw. Lauren Matthews, always professional and measured, had canceled all her meetings and disappeared for 2 days. When she finally returned on Wednesday, her red eyes and deep circles under her eyes told a story that no one dared to ask directly. "I got a call from Megan," Ashley said, carefully closing the door to Lauren's office. The afternoon sun streamed in through the panoramic windows, creating elongated shadows on the gray carpet. Lauren froze, her hand hanging over the keyboard of her notebook. What did she want? "To know why you didn't respond to the wedding invitation and why Chris has been acting so strange since Monday." Ashley sat down in the chair opposite her friend's desk. Lauren, what exactly happened at the Thinking Cup? Before Lauren could answer her cell phone, it vibrated with a message. It was Chris again. We need to talk. Things got complicated with Megan. I ruined everything, Lauren muttered, pushing the phone away. I should have kept my mouth shut. Ashley leaned forward, his face expressing genuine concern. Megan mentioned that Chris has been distant, canceled 2 meetings with the decorator and spends hours locked in his office. I can't be responsible for destroying their relationship, Lauren declared, standing up abruptly. She walked over to the window, watching the city below. Maybe I should take that offer from the office in San Francisco. Running away won't solve anything, Ashley argued. You've been running away for years, Lauren, first from Ryan, now from her feelings for Chris. The intercom rang, interrupting the conversation. The secretary's voice sounded hesitant. Miss Matthews, Mr. Bennett is here. He insists on seeing you. Lauren felt her heart stop for a moment. Her eyes met Ashley's, who was already getting up. Let him in, Lauren replied, her voice firmer than she felt. Chris entered the office like a contained storm, his blue eyes charged with emotion. Ashley muttered something about a meeting and discreetly left, closing the door behind him. You can't just drop a bomb like that and disappear, Chris said, his voice low but intense. You don't answer my messages, you don't answer my calls. What else was there to say? Lauren asked, keeping her distance. I've caused enough trouble. Megan realized something was wrong. He continued, running his hands through his hair in a frustrated gesture. She knows me too. Well, I had to tell her about our conversation. Lauren felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Chris, I'm sorry. I never meant to. The problem is that since that coffee, I can't think of anything else, he interrupted her, taking a step towards her. All those years, Lauren, all the times I wanted to tell you how I felt, but I respected your space, your healing time after Ryan. Please don't do this, Lauren begged, feeling the tears forming again. Megan suggested we postpone the wedding, Chris revealed, his voice breaking slightly. She said, I need to be sure of what I want. Lauren closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that revelation. I can't be the reason for you to doubt something so important. But you are, he replied, now so close that she could smell his familiar scent. It's always been you, Lauren, even when I was with other people, even now with Megan. A part of me has always belonged to you. It's not fair on Megan, Lauren whispered, opening her eyes to face him. She doesn't deserve it. And what do we deserve? Chris asked, his hand lightly touching her cheek. Waste more years pretending there isn't something between us. His touch was like electricity on her skin. Lauren pulled away, putting the table between them as a physical barrier to what her heart desperately wanted. You have to go, she said firmly, even though her voice was shaking. Go back to Megan. Forget what I said at the cafe. Forget all that. As if it were that simple, Chris replied, a sad smile on his lips. You've always been better than me at building walls, Lauren. Before she could reply, Ashley knocked on the door, entering with a worried expression. Lauren, sorry to interrupt, but Judge Henderson is on the line. It's about the Peterson case. Chris nodded, taking the cue. I'll let you get to work, but this conversation isn't over. After he left, Lauren collapsed in her chair, shaking. Ashley quickly closed the door and ran to hug her friend. There's no call from Judge Henderson, is there? Lauren asked between sobs. No, but you needed a way out, Ashley replied, stroking her hair. What are you going to do now? Lauren wiped away her tears, trying to regain her composure. The only thing I can do, keep my distance. Chris needs to figure out what he wants on his own, without me interfering. What Lauren didn't know was that at that very moment, Chris was standing in the elevator, staring at the engagement ring on his finger, questioning every decision that had led him there. And elsewhere in the city, Megan was sitting in her kitchen, contemplating an email, confirming her plane ticket to Paris, where her sister lived, considering whether it was time to make a difficult decision for all of them, the luxurious ballroom of the Four Seasons. Boston was filled with floral arrangements and decorators when Megan Reynolds entered, her heels echoing on the marble floor. With the wedding less than 3 weeks away, she should have been excitedly picking out the last details. Instead, her heart was heavy from the conversation she'd had with Chris the night before. Miss Reynolds, how nice of you to arrive. The wedding planner Patricia approached with a tablet in her hands. We need to define the positioning of the tables and cancel everything. Megan interrupted, her voice calm but firm. The wedding is suspended indefinitely. Patricia froze, her eyes wide. But all the deposits, the suppliers, send the cancellation invoices to my office. Megan replied, turning to leave. She paused for a moment, looking at the white lilies that would be used in her bouquet. Donate the flowers to a hospital. Someone should enjoy their beauty. As she left the hotel, Megan rechecked her ticket to Paris on her cell phone. Her sister Claire had already prepared the guest room in her apartment in Le Marais, 6 months away from Boston, away from all the drama, was exactly what she needed. Meanwhile, in the Martinez and Associates office, Lauren was trying to concentrate on a pile of documents when Ashley burst through the door. "The wedding's off," Ashley announced without preamble. "Megan's just called all the suppliers." Lauren felt the air escape from her lungs. "How did you?" "Boston is smaller than it seems, especially in the social circle we move in," Ashley replied, taking a seat. "But there's more. Megan is leaving the country." "What?" Lauren stood up abruptly, knocking over some papers. "This can't be happening, not because of me." "Lauren, you can't keep blaming yourself. Relationships end for different reasons." Lauren's phone vibrated. It was a message from Chris. "We need to talk. I'm going to your apartment tonight. He can't just turn up like that." Lauren muttered, more to herself than to Ashley. "Actually, he can," Ashley replied softly. "And you need to face up to that once and for all." The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and guilt when Lauren finally arrived at her apartment in Back Bay. It was after 7. She had barely taken off her shoes when the doorbell rang. Chris was standing at her door, still in his business suit, looking exhausted. "Can I come in?" Lauren stepped aside, allowing him to enter the apartment. Still held memories of countless movie nights and impromptu dinners between friends. Now the air seemed heavy with unspoken words. "Megan's going to Paris." Chris began walking over to the window overlooking the Charles River. "She said she needs space to think, and that I needed to." "Chris, I'm sorry," Lauren began, but he interrupted her. "No, don't apologize." He turned to face her. "Megan was right. I need to be sure of what I want, what I feel." "And what do you feel?" Lauren asked, her voice almost a whisper. Chris reduced the distance between them. "Since that coffee, I can't think of anything else but all the moments we've wasted, all the times I wanted to kiss you but held back because I didn't think it was the right moment. We have a complicated history," Lauren replied, her heart beating wildly. "Yes, we do, and maybe that's why it means so much." He touched her cheek gently. "But we can't just jump into it now. It would be unfair to everyone, including ourselves." Lauren nodded, understanding perfectly. "So what do? We give it time," Chris replied, dropping his hand. "I need to process all this." "And so do you. For how long?" "As long as it takes," he said, walking towards the door. "But this time we won't run away from each other, promise." Lauren felt tears in her eyes but managed to smile. "I promise." After Chris left, Lauren stood in the middle of her living room, absorbing everything that had happened. Her phone rang. It was a message from Ashley with a link to an airline ticket. "How about visiting your cousin in Seattle for a few weeks? A change of scenery would do you good." Lauren looked out of the window, seeing the city lights reflected in the river. Maybe Ashley was right. Maybe a little distance was exactly what they all needed to reorganize their thoughts and feelings. What none of them knew was that the next few weeks would bring revelations and changes that would transform their lives in ways they had never imagined. As it turned out, fate had its own plans for Lauren. Chris and Megan. Seattle greeted Lauren with a typical fall drizzle. The Space Needle rose through the mist as she watched the city from her cousin Jennifer's apartment on Queen and Hill. 3 weeks had passed since her last conversation with Chris, and the physical distance seemed to amplify every memory. "You've been staring at the window for half an hour," Jennifer commented, offering a cup of chamomile tea. "The office emails can wait." Lauren accepted the hot drink, grateful for the warmth spreading through her hands. "Ashley called me earlier today. She said Megan is settling in well in Paris." "And Chris, keeping his distance as we agreed," Lauren replied, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest. "Just occasional messages, nothing too deep." Jennifer settled down on the vintage sofa that dominated the room. "You know, it's ironic. You two spent years keeping your distance out of fear, and now you're doing the same, only consciously." Lauren's phone vibrated. It was a photo of Ashley at Le Petit Bistro, the restaurant where Chris had announced his engagement to Megan. "I miss Boston," Lauren admitted, "but I can't go back yet." "Why not?" Jennifer asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Because every time I think about going back, I imagine meeting Chris in a cafe or on Boston Common, and I don't know if I'm ready for that," Lauren confessed, taking a seat next to her cousin. "What if that time apart only serves to make him realize that Megan was the right choice?" The sound of rain against the windows filled the silence that followed. Jennifer had worked as a therapist for enough years to know when someone just needed space to process their thoughts. "I got an interesting invitation today," Lauren finally said. "A law firm here in Seattle is looking for a new partner. Ashley must have mentioned my name to them. Are you considering it?" Jennifer straightened up in surprise. "It would be a complete life change," Lauren replied, running her fingers along the rim of her cup. "Leaving Boston, the law firm I helped build." "Chris," Jennifer added softly. Lauren nodded, feeling tears forming. "Is it selfish of me to want to start over somewhere else?" "It's human," Jennifer corrected, "but you need to be sure whether you're running towards something new or running away from what you're afraid of facing." Lauren's cell phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Chris. Seattle must be beautiful this time of year. I remember when we took the trip to Vancouver and stopped there for 2 days. You love Pike Place Market. His heart raced at the memory that trip had. Happened 4 years ago, just after a breakup with Ryan. Chris had suggested the trip to help her distract herself, and it had been the best 5 days she could remember. He still knows exactly what to say, Lauren muttered, showing Jennifer the message. And what are you going to answer? Lauren thought for a moment before typing. The view from Queen and Hill is even more beautiful than I remember, but I miss the coffee at the Thinking Cup. The answer came almost immediately. The cafe isn't the same without you here. You two are impossible, Jennifer commented, reading over Lauren's shoulder. You've loved each other for years, you've finally admitted it, and now you're on opposite sides of the country, exchanging nostalgic messages. It's complicated, Lauren defended herself. Love always is, Jennifer replied, standing up, but you know it shouldn't be complicated, being honest about what we want. Lauren spent the rest of the evening thinking about her cousin's words in her guest room. She opened her laptop and started researching the Seattle law firm. It was a reputable firm with important cases and a solid reputation. Her phone rang. It was Ashley. How's the voluntary exile? Her friend asked as soon as Lauren answered. Less painful than being in Boston right now, Lauren answered honestly. How are things over there? Chris shows up at the office occasionally, always with some excuse about project documents. Ashley revealed. But we both know he only cares about you. Lauren closed her eyes, feeling the weight of distance. I got a job offer here in Seattle. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You're not really considering it, are you? I don't know, Ash. Maybe a fresh start is exactly what I need. Or maybe it's just another way to escape. Ashley replied, his voice gentle, but firm. Lauren, at some point you're going to have to stop running. The conversation ended shortly afterwards, leaving Lauren with more questions than answers lying on her bed. She opened the photo gallery on her phone, stopping at a picture of her and Chris on Boston's Harbor Walk, laughing at something she could no longer remember. What she didn't know was that at that same moment in Boston, Chris was in his Beacon Hill apartment looking at the same photo, wondering if time and distance really were the answer they were looking for. December arrived in Boston, covering the city in a white blanket of snow. Chris watched the falling flakes from the office of his architecture firm, thinking about how Lauren always said that the city was more magical in winter. 2 months had passed since she left for Seattle, and each day seemed heavier than the last. Do you have a minute? Marcus, her partner, knocked on the ajar door. I've just had an interesting call from Vancouver. They want us to take over the project for the new cultural center. Chris looked away from the window. Vancouver? 6 months minimum. It would be good for the firm to expand internationally. Marcus continued, studying his friend's reaction. And maybe that's exactly what you need right now. The mention of Vancouver brought back memories of that trip with Lauren 4 years ago. The way she smiled as she tasted different types of coffee. In every cafe they came across, how her eyes sparkled at the sight of the snow-capped mountains. When do they need an answer? Chris asked, picking up the folder Marcus held out. By the end of the week, but there's one more thing. Marcus hesitated. Ashley Martinez called me. Lauren is considering a permanent offer in Seattle. The news hit Chris like a punch in the gut. He knew the possibility existed, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. His phone vibrated with a message from Megan. Paris is beautiful in winter. I hope you're finding your answers just as I'm finding mine. I accept the project, Chris declared suddenly. Vancouver isn't Seattle, but it's closer than Boston. In Seattle, Lauren was concentrating on a pile of documents in her temporary office overlooking the Puget Sound. Jennifer was right. The work was stimulating, and the firm really wanted her to join the team permanently. Miss Matthews, Sarah, the administrative assistant, walked in with an envelope in her hands. This arrived for you via courier. Lauren immediately recognized Chris's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, there was just a postcard from Vancouver with a short message. I'll be on the West Coast for the next 6 months. Fate has an interesting sense of humor, doesn't it? His heart raced. Vancouver was only 3 hours from Seattle by car. Before he could fully process this information, his phone rang. It was Ashley. Before you freak out, yes, I knew about the project in Vancouver, Ashley began. And no, I had nothing to do with it. Apparently the universe is conspiring. Lauren leaned back in her chair, staring at the postcard. Ash, I was almost determined to accept the offer here in Seattle. Maybe it's time to stop making decisions based on running away or getting close to someone, Ashley suggested. What do you really want, Lauren? The question hung in the air as Lauren watched the city from the window. Seattle had become an unexpected refuge, a place where she could breathe without the weight of Boston's expectations and memories. I want to be happy, she finally answered, and I want to stop being afraid to try. Then maybe it's time to face that fear, Ashley replied softly. Chris, being in Vancouver doesn't have to mean anything other than what you allow it to mean. That night, after hours of considering her options, Lauren typed a message to Chris. Vancouver has some great coffee shops, but none compare to Thinking Cup. The reply came almost instantly. Maybe we could do some comparative research when I'm there for purely scientific reasons, of course. Lauren smiled, feeling that familiar warmth in her chest that only Chris could provoke. Purely scientific, when are you arriving? Next week, how about a coffee halfway? Between Vancouver and Seattle, Lauren hesitated only for a moment before replying, "There's a perfect place in Bellingham, I'll send you the address." Putting the phone away, Lauren walked over to the window of her temporary apartment. The city sparkled in the fine rain. So different from Boston, but just as charming somewhere to the north. Chris was probably doing the same, looking out at the night through his own window. "It's funny," Jennifer commented, entering the room with 2 glasses of wine. "It took you 3,000 kilometers apart to finally start being honest with each other." Lauren accepted the offered glass. "We're still learning to navigate all this. The distance has in a way made it easier to be vulnerable." "And now that the distance is lessening," Jennifer asked, arching an eyebrow, "now we'll find out if what we feel is strong enough to overcome our fears." Lauren replied, her gaze lost in the city lights. "Whether it's worth risking everything for something that could be extraordinary or end in heartbreak." What neither of them knew was that their paths were about to cross in a way that would change everything. The universe, with its peculiar sense of timing, had orchestrated an elaborate dance of meetings and mismatches that would lead them to a decisive crossroads. And in a small coffee shop in Bellingham, between Seattle and Vancouver, the next chapter of their story was about to begin. The small coffee shop in Bellingham, with its windows fogged up by the cold Pacific Northwest winter, seemed like a perfect setting for what was about to happen. Lauren arrived first, choosing a table near the fireplace. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the coffee cup in front of her, not because of the cold, but because of the anticipation of the meeting. The doorbell tinkled softly, and Lauren looked up. Chris was standing in the doorway, shaking some snowflakes off his coat. Their gazes met across the cozy room, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. "You've cut your hair," was the first thing he said as he approached. "And you grew a beard?" She replied, a small smile playing on her lips. Chris sat down, and the silence that followed was laden with unspoken words. A waitress approached to take his order, black coffee, as usual. "How's Vancouver?" Lauren asked, breaking the ice. "Different, beautiful, lonely," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I got an email from Megan yesterday." Lauren felt her heart squeeze. "And how is she?" "Fine, happy. Actually, she met someone in Paris, a literature professor at the Sorbonne." Chris paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's strange, but I feel happy for her." "Because you're at peace with your decision," Lauren observed softly. "I am," he agreed, leaning forward. "Lauren, these 2 months we've been a part of made me realize a lot of things." "Chris." "No, let me finish," she interrupted her gently. "I spent years of my life trying to do the right thing, waiting for the right moment. And when I finally thought I'd found it with Megan, you showed up at that cafe and said the words I'd always wanted to hear." Lauren felt tears forming in her eyes. "I'm sorry it took so long." "Don't be." Chris reached across the table, touching her fingers gently. "Maybe we needed to go through all this to get here, to really understand what we want." "And what do you want, Chris?" "You," he answered without hesitation. "It's always been you, Lauren, even when I try to convince myself otherwise." Lauren intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the familiar warmth of his touch. "I received a formal offer from the office in Seattle this morning." Chris felt his heart skip a beat. "And I realize that I can't make this decision based solely on running away from Boston or getting close to you," she answered honestly. "I need to do this for me." "I understand," Chris nodded, although his eyes revealed a hint of disappointment. "But I've also realized," Lauren continued, squeezing his hand lightly, "that for the first time in my life, I don't want to make a decision alone. I want us to do it together, whatever the outcome." The smile that lit up Chris's face was like the sunrise after a long night together. He repeated, savoring the word. "The project in Vancouver lasts 6 months," Lauren mused. "That's enough time for us to find out if we can make it work. Whether Seattle or Boston or anywhere else is where we should be." "What if it doesn't work out?" Chris asked, vocalizing the fear they both shared. "Then at least we'll know we tried," Lauren replied, "that we didn't let fear stop us this time." The snow continued to fall outside, creating a silent, white world that seemed to exist only for them. Chris got up from his chair, walked around the table, and sat down next to Lauren. "Do you know what else I've learned in these 2 months?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. "What? That some people come into our lives for a reason. Megan taught me to open my heart again. Ryan, even with all the pain he caused, brought you to me. And now here we are, exactly where we should be." Lauren turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Promise we won't waste any more time In response, Chris leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, delicate kiss laden with years of waiting and promises for the future. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. Ashley's going to be insufferable when he hears about this. Lauren laughed, leaning her forehead against his. Jennifer too, Chris added, referring to Lauren's cousin. But they always knew, didn't they, even when we didn't know it ourselves? The rest of the afternoon passed in a bubble of shared intimacy. They talked about everything and nothing, planned and dreamed. And when they finally left the cafe, the snow had stopped falling, leaving the world clean and new in the parking lot. Before going their separate ways, Chris to Vancouver, Lauren to Seattle, they hugged each other longingly. "See you next weekend?" Chris asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Yes," Lauren replied, smiling. "We have 6 months of cafes to try out between here and Vancouver, and a lifetime after that," he added. Kissing her once more before leaving, driving back to Seattle, Lauren thought about how life sometimes takes unexpected turns to lead us exactly where we need to be. In her rearview mirror, she could see the lights of Chris's car dimming as he drove north towards Vancouver, but this time the distance didn't hurt, because now they knew that some loves are worth the wait, that some destinations are inevitable, and that sometimes you have to lose yourself to finally find yourself somewhere between Seattle and Vancouver, between the past and the future, between fear and courage. Lauren and Chris finally found their way to each other, and that more than anything else was all that mattered.